Hello. So, for October, many people celebrate All Hallows Eve, as we knew it in days of yore, by reading spooky stuff. And so I've started off my reading October journey with The Scarecrows by Robert Westall. This was a book from my recent September haul, so it hasn't been sitting very long on the shelf before I got to it. And this author was recommended to me by someone, not this specific book. Now, if you haven't heard of Robert Westall, I'm not too surprised. First of all, look at that great cover. This is a puffin and it's aimed at children's audience. And it's a bit niche, I've got to say. So puffin are pretty good at telling us the illustrator generally. Oh, it looks like this might even have been published in New Zealand. Anyway, you've got this cute signature on the back, and the back also tells me that the cover illustration is by Alan Hood. It makes it very, very spooky, which is why I thought it would be good for October. Okay, Robert Westall. Possibly not too many people are going to know Robert Westall or this book. Robert Westall was an Englishman. He was born in 1929, according to Wikipedia, and died in 1993. He was a teacher, but he was an English author who is known primarily for fiction aimed at children and young people. And he won the Carnegie Medal for the year's outstanding children's book by a British subject, which is a thing. He won it twice. And the second time he won it was for this book. The first time, I think he won it for The Machine Gunners, which was a fiction set in the real world by some children who find a machine gun left over from World War II, if I've got it right, which I may not. Anyhow, The Scarecrow was copyright in 1981. And it's interesting that as an 80s book that won the Carnegie in the 80s, this feels much more ancient to me than I would have expected. Now, I was around in the 80s, and it seems kind of like yesterday, only a yesterday without internet or phones. But this, to me, reading it today, feels more like a 60s or 70s experience. Now, this book is probably not terribly out there. Goodreads only has 33 reviews for it. So it's probably not terribly well known, and I suspect some of that has to do with Robert Westall. I always remember Robert Westall as a fantasy and science fiction writer because of The Cats of Sarosta, which was the first book by him that I read. Since then, I regularly buy books by him and read them, and am puzzled by the fact that they are the most mainstream of mainstream fiction. They don't depart from reality a whole lot. This one presents as a spooky experience. You can see from the cover says it all, really. And the back blurb and nearly everything I've said, seen or read about it online misrepresent this book in ways, in my opinion, to my experience. So the back here says, there were 3 figures standing among the turnips, quite motionless, so inhumanly motionless it was beyond belief. Who were they? He had to know, underlined. While reluctantly spending the summer at his hated stepfather's house, Simon Wood takes refuge from the family in the old mill house across the field. When the scarecrows appear, Simon knows that it's only a matter of time before he is faced with a terrifying test. It sounds really spooky. And about this much of it is. The rest is very much Robert Westall, as I keep being surprised by him. It is a very real life, normal people in normal scenarios book. So while the scarecrows at the end were awesome, and I'll get to that, the majority of this book is about Simon and his very normal experiences. Simon is a young boy at a boarding school. His father's dead. He idolizes his father, who was a soldier in the war. He's got his medal. He keeps him alive in his memory. He also loves his mum, and we hear he's got a younger sister that he quite likes at home, but he's in this boarding school. And the boarding school sounds like horror in a whole way that we don't think of horror. The bullying there is deep-rooted and endemic, and the dissociation that Simon seems to experience from his reality, from his emotions, from the people around him, is really quite phenomenal, and it's incredibly well written, and it is horrible in a specific way. So you've got this bullying school with deep... You've got to say that there's more mental health in here than supernatural, honestly. It's sinister, and it's horrific, and it's discomforting in ways that I don't think that in 2025 we really want to give to children, because there's often not an acknowledgement of what's happening. There's not a resolution to very much of it. And I think that though this is written as a children's book, published as a children's book, awarded as a children's book in the 80s, in the 2020s, this is an adult's book. And possibly not one that is going to be very enjoyable, fascinating, well written. I enjoyed it very much, but also thoroughly unnerving. So Simon in the school, we start off with Simon in his school dorm, lying in the dark as he hears the major bully working himself up, called Bowden. Surnames, everybody, in English schools. Anyway, Bowden is working himself to be a whole phenomenal bullying abuser to everyone else in the dorm. And Simon is hanging on by a thread there, but Bowden's a little bit scared of him, because one time in the past when his mother had come to the school, Bowden started on her at night, and Simon succumbed to the devils, as he calls them. He went off his rocker and beat the hell out of the bully, and the fact that he was hurt in the process, he didn't even remember it when he came up. So we've got Simon suffering from these demons, which are actually some sort of dissociative experience, I would say. And Simon himself is our main protagonist, and we can't not like him, because from the inside his world is very consistent, but it is a childish world in that he doesn't have a lot of insight into anything else or into himself, which is why it feels very 60s or 70s to me, because I think by the 80s people were being encouraged to look into themselves and be a bit more self-analytical. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Anyhow, Simon in this school, we find out about his inner life, which is a depauperate, barren place. And we slowly see his mother comes to school for an open day, and she's driven there by someone at the gallery she works, who's an artist. We learn an illustrator, a very famous illustrator, who Simon takes an immediate dislike to, of course. And in the fullness of time, no spoilers here, it's all on the back, it's all on the cover. Simon's mother and Joe Morton, Joe something beginning with M, Joe Morton, fall in love and get together. And that part is a truly breathtakingly edge of your seat, oh no time for the reader, because Simon has seen them at the school that one time when she told him that nothing was happening between them. He just offered her a ride when her car was in the garage. And he suspects later that something has happened, but nothing is communicated from his mother to Simon about what's going on. He learns it's by secondhand from his kid sister when he's home for the holidays. Then his mother gets him to go to a gallery opening, even though he says he doesn't want to. He goes. He's stuck in this crowd. His mother pays virtually no attention to him while he's there. He's wandering around, he's eating things, and he gets thirsty. He can't find any water, so he drinks some of the wine that's circulating freely and ends up dead drunk at the age of... what is this? It's pre-adolescent. I'm going to say he feels like he's 11 or 12 max. Dead drunk. It does tell me at one stage, and I think Westall envisages him as older, but he doesn't feel like true adolescent. He feels a bit pre-adolescent to me. Dead drunk behind a screen, which is where he finds out from commoners talking quite nastily about his mother that his mother is dating Joe Morton. So that's not an ideal way, actually, to find out that your beloved mother is cheating on your dead father by taking a new husband. Now, this is a problem for many young kids and adolescents, and I hope these days it's handled more sensitively than Simon's mother did, because that was truly horrific. But I think if so, there are probably many child psychologists out there who could do a whole thesis on this book. Anyhow, they get together. Simon is miserable about it. The way he's mishandled by his mother and his new stepfather is astronomical. Their house is packed up while he's at school. He has no say in what happens to it. He has a say in what happens to his things in his mother, that his mother asks him, what would you like to keep? And the level of dissociation in Simon is growing incrementally. And we as readers feel it with him. So quite horrible in its own way. Now, John Morton is this famous illustrator. With all his money, he's bought the mill house out in some rural town, somewhere in England that I don't recognise at all, not having been to England since I was about 18. When they get there, we have an increasingly isolated and miserable image as Simon is forced to be in this house where he feels all alone, where Joe Morton and his mother and his kid sister are forming this happy little tight nuclear family from which he is totally excluded. He takes refuge, as the back suggests, in the empty old mill across the fields, across this sinister turnip field. And there's something very weird and spooky about this old mill. And the old mill is sort of the focus of spookiness, but it's also fascinating in that everything that we're getting from it could actually be Simon's misery externalizing. So are the three coats on the coat hanger really moving? Are there really people there? Or is it just Simon desperately lonely and miserable? The whole old mill is fascinating and I loved it. And then the mill and the old mill house and his family sort of meld together in strange ways. And it culminates in a truly spooky scene. At this point, Simon has been doing some horrible things. And some of them are entirely justified to him. But of course, as an adult, you can see the internal experience and the external experience of everyone else. Fascinating. Fascinating reading book. Definitely not for everyone. Certainly not for everyone who wants a traditional spooky book, because the spookiness only occurs at the end. And yeah, I'll spoiler it. Why not? How many of you are actually going to read this? Put up your hands. I can't see any hands up. So Simon's done some truly horrible things to his mother, and he ends up getting beaten up by his new stepfather, and I think his mother as well, for something that he did, which is not addressed by Simon Westall, and I think by the 80s we should be addressing that sort of thing. In his room, he discovers that in the cupboard where the only possession he really values, which is his father's old rucksack and all his possessions, there's a knot hole from his bedroom down to his mother and new stepfather's bedroom, and talk about creepy. Now, the old adage that eavesdroppers never hear good of themselves is true, not true. As an adult reading through that, it's fascinating. Because Simon's misbehaving so badly, his mother contacts his only friend who lives on the island of Jersey to come and stay with them. The fact that this is his friend is obscure up until then. We know that this is someone else who sleeps in his dorm at their boarding school, but Simon's level of dissociation in this book is so acute that we didn't even know this was a friend of his, really. So he comes, he's a big joker and a clown, and everyone likes him, and Simon is kind of drawn back a bit, but not enough, because by now he has sent out a plea to the universe to help him. He thinks he's talking to his dead father, but his dead father, buried thousands of kilometers away in an eastern grave, does not hear this. But what stands between Simon and the east as he's speaking is the old mill and its ghosts. Ghosts, manifestations of people that have lived there before, we don't know. But the scarecrows appear in the field, and Simon can't understand where they've appeared from. No one knows where these scarecrows come from. He doesn't understand why they're familiar until suddenly he realizes that the 3 scarecrows are dressed in the 3 coats and hats that were hanging in the old mill hat. And that they seem to be reflecting, representing, reenacting an old horror story that happened at the mill house and the old mill when a man and his wife became entangled with a con man who ran the mill during the war. So I found this a fascinating story. Hopefully I have got you to see the fascinating element of it in this review. I'm not necessarily telling you to read this story, though. I think it's a very niche audience as reflected by the Goodreads very few reviews that you can see there. It is far more of a kid's book, and it is far more about a strange abusive situation and a poor lonely boy than it is about spooky stuff. But the spooky stuff at the end is well worth reading for if you are thoroughly into these kind of niche books. So, thank you for watching. First book read totally in the month of October for Spooky October. Spend Spooky October reading good books. Thank you.